What's going on, everybody? It's Clint from the Die Hard MMA podcast, and this is the Total Takedown for UFC Vegas 47. That's right, we are back in full swing. That means we've got the Total Takedown, and of course, the Friday undefeated post-weigh-in show coming to you 8 weeks in a row. We've got some good MMA action coming up. What we do on this particular show, if you're new to the channel, is we take a look at this card, but we only talk about totals. We're going over, we're going under. How long are these things going to last? That's where we approach this thing. If you want to see the full-on breakdown of how these fights are going to play out, where we pick the winners, the sides, go check out my Monday podcast where I break that down with a guest right here on Pub Sports Radio. Do me a favor, smash the like, subscribe. We just hit 15K, baby. We beat Pub Ben. Thank you all so much for jumping on board with the Pub crew. Let's get into this show. First fight of the night, Malcolm Gordon taking on Dennis Bondar. What we've got is a total set at 2.5. The over is plus money, it looks like, anywhere from plus 105 to plus 120. The under is the chalk here, minus 140, minus 150. And I think the under just makes so much sense here in this spot. We've talked about Malcolm Gordon. We know he's the chinniest guy on the UFC roster right now. But what he does is he brings some solid submission grappling and some offensive BJJ to the table. His opponent, Dennis Bondar, he's 16-3. This kid's supposed to be a prospect. He is slick. He absolutely is capable of knocking Malcolm Gordon out, but pretty much anybody is. What can happen in this spot is that maybe this kid's not ready for the bright lights. Maybe he has a bad weight cut. Maybe he makes a mistake in a scramble, and someone like Gordon, who's as slick as he is on the ground, has the opportunity to lock up a submission. The under 2.5 is the way to go, and betting on violence here for the first fight of the night, probably something I'm actually going to add to my official card here, because I do like that spot. I expect someone to go to sleep, probably Bondar by knockout, but hey, this is the type of under that you definitely want a piece of both guys on. Jason Witt taking on Phil Rowe, the Fresh Prince himself. Total on this one appears to be set at, it is split. It looks like there's no, it is perfectly tied here. We got 1.5s and 2.5. So what the hell? We'll talk about both. 1.5 is set to over minus 155 with the under being plus 135. The 2.5 is over plus 120 with the under being about minus 140, minus 150. And honestly, that's about where I would set these lines myself, because if you're looking over, you're saying, you know, wrestler Jason Witt, he's going to get the control time, the body lock, the takedown. He's going to grind on Phil Rowe. Absolutely. That makes sense. Rowe gives up takedowns. If you're looking at the Rowe side, you're going under, baby, violence. This guy's going to knock Jason Witt out. He's got a 10-inch reach advantage. He's got that slick Muay Thai. We know Jason Witt has no chin, so that's kind of where you're looking. Under for Rowe, over for Witt. The under 2.5, I feel like, makes some sense because round one probably belongs to Witt. Like, regardless of how this fight ends up going and who gets their hand raised at the end, we expect the grappling of Witt to be sharp and on point early in this fight. But the longer the fight goes, the more it plays into Phil Rowe's hands, because honestly, if this fight finishes, I only see it coming from the Rowe side. I know some people who are saying Jason Witt has the chance to end this thing on the ground, but Rowe's a BJJ black belt. He's not a guy that you TKO. If you start working like that on him, he's going to find a way to scramble and get back up to his feet. I think Witt's going to be more focused on the control, making sure he stays safe. But one thing Witt does is slow down. He gasses out. The longer this fight goes, the slower he gets, the more vulnerable he becomes, and Rowe is the kind of guy that cranks the intensity up and gets more and more in your face the longer the fight goes. I personally see a second or a third round finish for Rowe, and I know we're supposed to be picking totals, not sides, but basically what that brings me to is I kind of like the over 1.5. I kind of like the under 2.5. I think it lands right in that middle zone on this one. So depending on which side of the line you are choosing, which fighter you like, and which line you have available to you, that's kind of how I'd be approaching it. Personally, I've already got a bet on Phil Rowe, so I'm not going to be betting this total, but taking a shot on Witt by decision or Rowe inside the distance, I think those are the two ways you go if you don't actually want to play the total. Next up, Danilo Marquez taking on Jailton Almeida. And I do apologize, everybody. For some reason, Best Fight Odds has this fight card split up into two segments. They've got UFC Vegas 47 and they've got UFC Fight Night 202. For some God knows what reason, they have these fights split up right down the middle. So it takes me a second to find it, more so than usual this week. I apologize. Total on this one is set at 1.5. The over 1.5 is even money, plus 100. The under 1.5, minus 135. There's a book out there that has it as a straight pick'em, minus 110 on either side. Kind kind of makes sense to me here on the 1.5. These are big boys. There's a lot of hype behind Jailton Almeida after what he did on the Contender Series, but we know what happens when these Contender Series fighters make their UFC debuts. There's always hype on them. They are always overpriced because we just saw what they did to a low-level fighter. Now they got to fight somebody at the UFC level. It's an adjustment. Honestly, I kind of like the over 1.5 here in this spot. I think Danilo Marques is savvy enough to go to his wrestling. We've seen Jailton Almeida. He's also primarily a grappler. I don't think he's going to submit Danilo Marques. We know Danilo can get tired depending on the game plan and how the fight plays out. He's been finished late in fights before. Jailton Almeida's striking is a big question mark. If he's leveled up, if he comes out and his striking is on point, maybe he TKOs Danilo Marques. But if he doesn't, this is probably going to be a jiu-jitsu match and a wrestling match. And if that's the case, I absolutely think we're going to get at least into the third round, maybe all the way to the judges. So over 1.5 even money, that's kind of the way that I would be looking in this spot. Next up, Alexis Davis taking on Julija Storya-Ranko. Total set at 2.5. This is your classic women's MMA spot. The over 2.5 minus 300. Under 2.5 is plus 220. And this is a spot where we might actually be able to snipe a little bit of value on that number because Julija Storya-Ranko just doesn't appear to be UFC level when it comes to the mixed martial arts. Her grappling, her BJJ, she is solid. She is super high level in that, but as soon as you mix in the cage work, the punches, the kicks, all that stuff, she just doesn't seem to be able to mesh it all together well enough to fight at the UFC level. Someone like Alexis Davis, who's also got a BJJ black belt in her back pocket, I think she'll be able to stay safe in the pure grappling moments and then just take over when the fight is in the actual realm of MMA. So because of that, you know, Julija Storya-Ranko is the type of fighter that likes to work off her back and look for that armbar from guard that we see so often in women's MMA. Because of that, that's going to A, put her in a position to finish, and B, put her in a bad spot where her opponent, Alexis Davis, might potentially be able to pound her out. If Alexis Davis is on top of Storya-Ranko, I think she goes to work with some of that ground and pound, and on the feet, she's probably going to bust her up. So I do think there's maybe a little bit of value to bet on violence here and say this fight doesn't quite make it to the judges' scorecard. Plus 200, plus 220, maybe worth a sprinkle. Not a spot that I've actually attacked myself. I don't have a great read on this fight, but I think both women do have a little bit of finishing upside here. Next fight up is Marc-André taking on Chidi Njokuani, and this one is one that I can stay on this page for, thank you. Total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 looks to be about minus 165. The under 2.5 is plus 145. And I kind of like that over 2.5 in this spot. Chidi is, even though he's got some finishing upside, he's a BJJ black belt. He's got some slick striking. We know he's going up against Marc-André, who's almost impossible to finish. This guy is not someone that you put down easily. I think Chidi's going to have a technical approach to this fight. We know Marc-André forces the grappling situations, pins his opponent up against the fence, slows the pace of the fight down, and that tends to drag it out. Marc-André's not much of a finisher himself. I mean, if he's got an opponent who's completely gassed out, who's got nothing left to give in that third round, then he ratchets it up, then he TKOs them and puts them away. But that happens so rarely, it's not something that we can count on. In this particular situation, with a guy like Chidi that we don't know necessarily is the type to gas out deep in that fight, late in that third round, I don't know that he's going to be completely helpless. So because of that, I'm going to say over. Minus 165 for the over 2.5. I think that's a fair price tag for the way these two guys fight. Hakeem Dawodu taking on Mike Trizano. Total here is set at 2.5. Over 2.5 is minus 275. The under 2.5 is plus 200. And this is a spot where I'm a little bit torn. I've got kind of a hot take on this fight. This is one where I think Mike Trizano is going to surprise a lot of people. We've seen Hakeem Dawodu get in these epic slugfest, and even though he looks like he's a crazy athlete, he's absolutely shredded, he's ripped, he's well muscled, he hits hard, he seems to hurt people every single fight that he's in. He doesn't seem to have that stopping power at the UFC level. He just doesn't put people away since he's been to the UFC. So I'm starting to question the power and the finishing ability of one Hakeem Dawodu in general. He's taken on a guy in Mike Trizano who comes from the Hurricane Shane school of durability. You don't put Mike Trizano down. This is the guy that Hakeem could tag Brock Lesnar in to hit him with a sink, and he's still going to be conscious for the rest of the fight. I don't think Mike Trizano gets finished here. On the flip side, I have seen Hakeem wobbled and stumbled. He hasn't gone down yet, but that's one of those ones where I keep watching and I go, it's going to happen. Like, eventually, somebody is going to not let up on him after they clip him and make him do that stank leg, and they're going to put him down. I actually think that's this Saturday. But the problem with this is that's more of a tinfoil hat theory of mine. There's no actual substantial evidence to go for that, and you all know how I roll. Whenever I'm going to take an under, I need both fighters to contribute in some way. What we have is Mike Trizano potentially contributing to that under, but his durability absolutely contributes to the over. Hakeem Dawodu doesn't really offensively contribute to that under for me. Durability-wise, I have my suspicions, but those have yet to be proven, so technically his durability also contributes to the over. I have to say over -2.5 based on the rules of my betting system. I'm not laying -275 on the over in this spot, and again, because of the way I see the fight playing out, if I'm betting anybody to finish, it's going to be Trizano. So I'd take him by knockout or inside the distance if you're going to take a poke on some kind of violence in this spot rather than the under, because I just don't see Dawodu being able to crack Mike Trizano personally. Next fight up, Miles Johns taking on John Castañeda. Total set at 2.5 here. We've got the over, it looks like -200, the under +150, round total set at 2.5. And I think that makes a ton of sense. Miles Johns, a guy who's finished a couple fighters recently in that third round, but he doesn't seem to be that heavy of a front runner these days. He kind of takes his time, out athletics people when he has the opportunity to, and that's really, he separates himself the farther the fight goes on. Someone like John Castañeda, good footwork, nice reach advantage here, good movement, hard to finish himself, decent wrestler, good gas tank. He checks all the boxes. He's one of these guys that absolutely could be competitive at the UFC level, and if that's the case, I think he survives Miles Johns. I think Miles Johns is the type of guy that's going to have to rely on the grappling in this situation. If this becomes a 15-minute striking affair, I mean, Miles Johns hits hard. He could get John Castañeda's calf the way he did in his last fight. Maybe he lands a big bomb, but I don't think Castañeda's the type to go down from that type of a shot. I think he'll be more involved in the striking if that's the case. So as much as I don't like it, I'm going to say over. I don't like this one at all, though. Like the -200 chalk price, I'm never laying that on this over 2.5 in this case. This is exactly the kind of fight where one of these two guys very easily could have leveled up, or if one of them decides they want to turn this into a banger, the other guy is going to oblige. Nobody's slowing this fight down as soon as it goes off the rails. Once one of these guys says, meet me in the center and don't move out of the pocket, one of these guys is going to fall. So there's that chance of it going completely off the rails. Again, nothing to support that. I'm just telling you that's the way these guys are going to fight. So I'm not going to be betting the over 2.5, but I will make that the pick for the show. Next fight up, Julian Juicy J. Erosa taking on Stephen Ocho Peterson. Total on this one set at 2.5. The over is -1, looks like 35. Under is about +105 or even money +100. Total again, 2.5 rounds. And this one is one that I really have a hard time with because you all know my system. If I'm going under, I need both guys to contribute. Well, Julian Erosa contributes under in two ways. He has no chin. We've seen this guy cracked. We've seen this guy hurt. He's been put away in almost every single one of his losses. So absolutely he contributes to the under durability-wise. Offensively, he's a monster. He finishes pretty much everybody that he beats. I think he's only been to like 6 decisions over the course of his entire career. If he wins, he's probably finishing. Knockout or submission, he doesn't discriminate. He can do both. So he contributes to the under twice. Ocho Peterson, on the flip side of this thing, contributes to the over twice. This guy is durable as shit. You don't finish Steven Peterson, and he showed us in his last fight that his submission defense is absolutely on point against a very high-level grappler. So the club and sub from Julian Erosa is maybe the key to this whole thing. If he rocks him, if he makes him go glassy-eyed and then he locks up a choke after he can't quite think and doesn't defend himself properly, that's how Juicy J gets it done inside the distance. But besides that, I think Ocho Peterson can probably stand with Julian Erosa the rest of the fight. The problem is, Ocho Peterson isn't much of a finisher. I feel like the UFC game has kind of passed him by at this point. I don't think he's evolved well enough, and I think that they actually gave him his last opponent to make his opponent look good. He got brought back after like a 2-year layoff and was supposed to be a layup for Chase Hooper. So I don't expect much out of him in this fight. But if anybody is going to get clipped and clubbed by someone that you don't see coming, it's a guy with a chin like Julian Erosa. So this one is probably a dead nuts over until it's not. Like, I want no part of this total. I want absolutely no part of this total. Julian Erosa should just run through Ocho Peterson, but at any point in time, Peterson could step down, bite down on his mouthpiece, land a haymaker, and call it a day. So, you know, I guess I'll say under. I guess I'm going to say under after all of that, I think Peterson's durability will hold up until it doesn't, and then Julian Erosa's a liability. So I have to say under because of the quality of that guy's chin. Bryan Battle taking on Tresean Gore. I cannot wait for this fight. Total set at 2.5, and it's ever so slightly juiced to the under. It looks like -110, -105 to the over 2.5, with -120, -125 to the under 2.5. So they are expecting ever so slightly violence in this spot, and I tend to agree with that. The problem is we don't know much about either of these guys. Now, Tresean Gore, he's only got 3 professional fights, and the fight tape for him is almost impossible. Like, you can't really see what this guy does. He's had a long layoff. He's coming off an injury. We have no clue what to expect from Tresean Gore. If anything, all we know is the guy is incredibly explosive, and when he explodes, he's fast as hell and he hits hard. So we're thinking probably knockout from Gore, right? That's about the only thing that we can really assume. Bryan Battle, though, he's a bit more of a volume guy. He's the kind of guy that takes your best and then continues punching you in the face until you fall over because you either got tired trying to finish him or you just couldn't keep up with him. I absolutely think both of those are going to be on the plate here. If Tresean Gore gets in one of those spots where he hurts Battle early but doesn't put him away, then the tables are going to get flipped and Battle's just going to overwhelm him throughout the course of the fight. Plus, we can always assume that Gore has that nuclear option. If he lands a good one, it's probably over. So yeah, I'll say violence. I'll say under 2.5, -120, -125. Doesn't sound half bad to me. Sam Alvey taking on Brendan Allen. What a, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this fight, you guys. I'm so torn. Total on this one set at 2.5. This one is a pick'em. It looks like the market is split. There's one book that has it over 2.5 -120, whereas the other books I'm seeing have it under 2.5 -120. So slight chalk either way. The market doesn't really know how they want to approach this one. Sam Alvey has an absolute nuclear missile in his hands, and he can finish just about anybody when he lands. The problem is his game plan. He likes to skate along the outside of the cage, kind of run away from his opponent, and look for that one perfect shot to put them down. Problem is that doesn't ever hardly arise. Like, your opponent really has to make a mistake for Sam Alvey to land that bomb and put his opponent down. Recently, he's been going to a lot of decisions. Sam Alvey, even though he's been rocked a couple times, even though he got, clubbed and sub a fight or two ago, most of the time he hangs in there. He's been tough, he's been durable, hard to take down, just kind of hangs around in the fight and gets outpaced. Brendan Allen, we've seen him have spectacular striking. We saw what he did to Punahele Soriano. He was able to stay away from the big exchanges and then use some seriously high fight IQ in his striking to go ahead and get the win. We've also seen when he can't get the wrestling going because that's his escape, that's his eject button when he needs to get out of there. He can be a little bit out of sorts on the feet. He still makes mistakes, he still overextends, and his durability is a giant question. He's making a quick turnaround here after getting murdered by Chris Curtis. Man, if there was ever a spot where Sam Alvey was going to catch a guy, it's going to be like this on Saturday. A guy who gets a little overextended, a guy who's rolling off the couch, who doesn't have a game plan, who wasn't prepared really for this fight. Like, this is exactly the kind of opponent that Sam Alvey is going to catch. Help me, folks. I think I've got a problem because I want to bet Sam Alvey again by knockout, even though I swore with the opponent change I wasn't going to do that. But you listen to, like, Brendan Allen's interviews and stuff like that, it's not good. He doesn't have a plan coming into this one. And then you listen to Sam Alvey's interview, he knows his back is against the wall, and he even said himself that he's got to go forward, bite down on the mouthpiece, and swing. And that's what we have all been saying Sam needs to do for the last 2 years when he's been on this losing streak. The problem is, will Sam actually follow that game plan? I don't know. If he does, he probably wins this fight. If Sam steps forward instead of taking that back foot and just lets go on Allen, yeah, he probably knocks his ass out. One more factor, this thing's happening at 205. There's extra weight being thrown around. Some people might say that that actually helps the durability, so it's going to be something that kind of takes away from an under or a violence bet. But I tend to think that actually adds to the power. I mean, both these guys are going to be fresher, at least early. Brendan Allen, we have no idea where his cardio's at this point, because if he did just roll off the couch, he's absolutely gonna be looking for that finish, and he's gonna be looking for the finish early. And then there's a chance he fades off and is helpless later on in the fight. Sam Alvey, he's had a full training camp. He's ready to go for this fight. He just doesn't have to cut weight. That absolutely adds to the power. That's not gonna be a problem for him to keep swinging harder and longer in this spot because he just didn't have to go through the weight cutting process after having a full training camp for his opponent. I don't know, guys. I think I've got to go violence. I've got to say under 2.5 here because I do think Brendan Allen is going to try to get back on the horse by making a statement. I don't think he's going to try to matador someone like Sam Alvey because, let's be real, unless Sam Alvey completely turns his game plan on his head, he's never the come forward kind of guy. He's going to be the counter striker in this spot. So I think that means Brendan Allen's going to have to go forward, probably look for the takedown, probably look for the kill early because he won't be able to trust his gas tank in this spot. If Sam Alvey's submission defense or takedown defense hold up, then once Brendan Allen doesn't get that going and it becomes a striking match, all of a sudden this becomes far more interesting. And if Sam Alvey actually does have that sense of urgency and let's go in this spot, we got a slugfest on our hands, and both these guys have been cracked before. So yeah, let's go under 2.5. Let's say violence. Sorry, that was a long one. I didn't get a chance to break it down on Monday because this is a short notice fill-in spot for Brendan Allen, so I had to get my thoughts out there for everybody. Shavkat Rakhmanov taking on Carlston Harris is our next fight. We've got a total on this one set at 1.5, so finally breaking a little bit of the monotony up here. Over 1.5 is -130, under 1.5 is plus 110, it looks like, plus 105 in a couple of spots. So a little bit of plus money on the under 1.5. And I kind of agree with the over here, but this is definitely not a total that I would at all be looking to bet. The way that Carlston Harris fights, I mean, he really just sells out for that takedown, and he is nasty on the floor. He clubs people with these giant mitts of his, and then you're completely helpless to his submission game once he gets you on the floor. Shavkat Rakhmanov, he's shown some decent grappling chops, some good solid submission defense, so maybe he can swim in those waters. I don't know, but if he's able to stay at range, you know, this is maybe one of the few times Harris is going to fight somebody that's taller and longer than he is. That just doesn't happen because he's such a tall, lanky guy. Shavkat's going to challenge that. If Carlston isn't able to club him down, if Carlston isn't able to get, you know, his takedown offense going, or those wild punches get taken advantage of, I think Shavkat probably lays him out. Like, Shavkat is such a clean striker on the feet. He does so many things right, and he hits so hard. I think this is a car crash, folks. Like, no matter who ends up controlling this fight, I just don't know that the other person is able to take it. And that's not a diss on their toughness or their durability. It's just because of the offense both guys are capable of. So as much as I want to say the over 1.5, that this thing is a battle of future contenders, that it crawls into that second round because it's a next level matchup, this is another one of those ones that as soon as it goes haywire, you can't close Pandora's box. Like, once these guys start one-upping each other, it just is not going to go back down. It's never going to settle down after somebody cranks up the intensity. So this one could be over in about 2 minutes. So I'm not touching the total because I think there's value on that plus tag on the under 1.5, but I can also see maybe a more calculated game plan. I mean, if Rakhmanov's submission defense and counter grappling is on point, you know, maybe he gets taken down and plays off of his back, but doesn't let Harris get any type of advantage and top pressure going. If Harris is able to stand on the feet with Shavkat, maybe Shavkat beats him with a jab all night, but can't ever quite find that kill shot. Like, there's ways this can go over, and then there's a lot of ways it can go under. This is one of those totals I want no part of. Co-main event, Punahele Soriano taking on Nick Maximov. Total on this one set at 1.5. The over looks like it's chalked up to about -160, -175 in a couple places. The under 1.5 is +130, +140, and the over makes total sense. In this spot, you've got Punahele Soriano, who is basically a Francis Ngannou acolyte. He's gone to the school of hard knocks taught by Francis Ngannou. He fights the same way. He's got that big explosive power. He can finish this fight early if he wants to. If Nick gives him the opportunity to, Punahele will absolutely knock him out and put him down. The longer this fight goes on, though, the more it favors Nick Maximov, who's just that never-ending grappler. He's got good, solid pace. We saw him on short notice, you know, his last fight or two, so the questions about his gas tank are there, but if he's able to get the grappling going and survive Punahele in that first round, he probably starts taking over the longer this fight goes on. So maybe there's a late finish. Maybe we're talking, you know, Puna slows down, gets tired, gets subbed out in the second or the third round. But again, that would be the second or the third round. Punahele doesn't have 4 minutes of gas. He can get to that 7-minute mark. He can get to that 8-minute mark. And we've seen that he's a decent wrestler. He hasn't truly been tested by somebody who's like awesome, But from what we've seen, he's got decent hips. We know he's got that back class that's in his back pocket. He's got the ability to counter grapple against people. So I think Punahele can at least hold his own until this fight gets over 1.5 if he's losing. And that's kind of the key. Maybe Puna lands a nuke and this thing is done in the first minute and a half or so. But if that doesn't happen, it's going over 1.5. Main event time. Jack Hermansson taking on Sean Strickland. Talk about the fights you don't want to have to pick a side on. 4.5 here's the total, set at a pick'em price. It looks like some money's coming in on the over 4.5. It's -120, -130 in a couple of spots, but most places are still hanging the -110, -115 on both sides here. And honestly, I kind of completely disagree with that because Sean Strickland, we know he likes to play with his food. We know when he's in control, he's in the driver's seat, he just pops people and he'll go for 25 minutes and never let you off the hook. But he does start sitting down on his punches. He's a twisted individual. He likes being mean. He likes hurting people. And someone like Jack Hermansson, we've seen him wobble a few too many times for my liking. You know, the way Marvin Vettori cracked him in that first round and sat him down, nearly finished him, but followed him to the ground. I don't think Sean's going to do that. Like, if Sean cracks him and hurts him that way, he'll just stand him right back up and do it again. So I don't know that Jack is going to take multiple concussive shots from Sean Strickland and keep coming. I think there's definitely the chance he goes down. Sean Strickland, as much as we all think his takedown defense is solid, we know he's got the underrated grappling. Is he on the level of a Jack Hermansson? Well, if Jack's got the wrestling to be able to get this man to the floor, we'll find out, and that's trial by fire right there. Jack Hermansson is a slick grappler. He's got those leg locks. He likes to dive on ankles. I mean, you never know what this guy is going to do. And then, of course, he's got that ground and pound that if he's able to get a solid control position on you once you're on the mat, Jack Hermansson really can go to work. So as much as this one looks like it leans towards the over, both guys absolutely have that finishing upside. So I'm going to lean violence. I don't have a bet on this one. I'm tempted to go under this 4.5 here as an official pick. I haven't quite made up my mind just yet, but I think both guys have that slight chink in the armor, and they both have the type of offense that can take advantage of their opponent having just a small spot that they might not be able to defend. So I'll say under 4.5 in the main event. That's the total takedown, folks. Make sure you give me that like. Thank you very much for helping out. It helps all of us at Pub Sports Radio. Give me a follow at Diehard MMA Pod on Twitter. Comment down below what your favorite total for UFC Vegas 47 is. And then I will see you tomorrow for the undefeated post-weigh-in show. Let's roll.